This broadcast is the property of Codependents Anonymous. Reproduction without written permission from Codependents Anonymous is not permitted.
Hello everyone, welcome to this very special workshop by Ritchard, the 12 Commitments. And so would you give Ritchard a warm welcome and thank you for doing this workshop.
I'm a grateful and enthusiastic member of Codependents Anonymous. My name is Ritchard and I'm codependent as hell. My home group is the Experience, Strength and Hope group, Codependents Anonymous in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. You may have heard that name before if you're familiar with this booklet. It's that group. My first CoDA meeting was the Monday after Mother's Day 21 years ago. I walked into that first meeting with my life kind of burnt to the ground, married to a woman who was praying for me to die in a car crash. She'd been praying that for some time because apparently it's easier to be widowed than divorced. And since I didn't really want to live anymore, at least we had something we could agree on. And I walked into this room full of people who scared the hell out of me. But they talked about my problems. They were actually talking about their own lives, and they were describing my problems. And they talked about having found a way to get better from that. They talked about the music of recovery, or the broken record, as we like to call it. Come to the meetings, get a sponsor, work the steps. Come to the meetings, get a sponsor, work the steps. Come to the meetings and get a sponsor. Oh, by the way, work the steps. And I was in so much pain and I was so desperate for something to change that I did the things that they suggested. And darned if things didn't start to change. And after I had been growing and changing for a little while in Codependents Anonymous, the lady that I was married to decided that this was interesting to her. Apparently there's nothing worse than somebody in the family is growing spiritually and it's not you. So she ended up coming to Codependents Anonymous for a while. She also started in another fellowship where she's stuck and still is today. And every once in a while she comes and spends a few years at a time in CoDA, and has deep connections and relationships within our little secret society here. But what's important today is that about a year into recovery, we were both introduced to a set of new ideas, perspective on the 12 traditions that was a little different than what we'd come across. Now, I don't know about your group, but in my group at that time, if you said that, oh, we got a tradition meeting this week, attendance would go down. Right, the traditions are those dry, legalistic sounding things that we have to read at the beginning of the meeting because World Service says so, right? But what we got introduced to is the idea that, those 12 traditions that we got from Alcoholics Anonymous were first introduced in Alcoholics Anonymous at their 1951 General Service Conference. And they were introduced by the co-founder, Bill W., as a way to keep groups together and in harmony, a way of keeping alcoholics, some of the most difficult people on the face of the planet, from killing each other in their business meetings. Now, to the best of my knowledge, in the 70 plus years since then, nobody has ever died in an AA business meeting. At least not as a result of violence. And that alone speaks to the power of those principles. And what we were shown was that if you scratch the surface on any of those 12 traditions, underneath it you find a spiritual principle that if I apply it in my life, helps me to get along with the other kids in the sandbox, makes my relationships go better. We did that for a couple of years, and our 10th wedding anniversary was coming up.
A little louder because they're getting loud.
Okay. I don't know if I can do louder other than just move it closer.
Kiss the mic.
Okay. So, a couple of years later, our 10th wedding anniversary was coming up, and we decided that we liked each other after all. We wanted to stick together and renew our wedding vows. But we didn't want to use our original vows because clearly those hadn't been working. And so we rewrote our wedding vows based on these 12 traditions, and we call those our 12 commitments. And that's some of what I want to talk to you about today, but I don't want to present that to you as a model for how you can have a fulfilling, intimate relationship with a life partner. I mean, great. That's worked for us. Your mileage may vary. All I want to do today is to introduce you to a different perspective on how you can use the principles of these traditions. And not just in an intimate life partnership, but in all of our relationships, right? Our relationship with family, with coworkers, with the clerk at the grocery store, with the kid that pumps your gas. Every single one of those is a relationship that can be improved if we apply these principles, if we use these tools. And that's the way I'd like you to think about it, is these 12 traditions as hands-on tools for better relationships. So after we'd started applying this in our marriage for a couple of years, we were also talking about it in our recovery. And the Experience, Strength, and Hope group decided that we wanted to do a mini retreat. It actually was held in my basement, on the 12 traditions as tools for relationship. And when we went looking at the CoDA literature, there was no resources there for that. So as a group, we made some. We wrote the 12-piece relationship toolkit booklet, which the weekend went well, and I offered the booklet to CoDA Canada. CoDA Canada adopted it as Canadian literature within CoDA, and a year later brought it to conference, where it was accepted as conference endorsed literature. Now it's been translated into God knows how many languages, and it's I know from my time on the core board that it's our #2 selling booklet. So it's something that we as a group take a great deal of satisfaction having been involved in. Not necessary. So, wow, I covered a lot of stuff here. So why don't we get into this? Because I can report to you that for me, my life, my relationships have changed as a result of being able to practice this. A month ago, Monday will have been my 28th wedding anniversary. So I can report to you that I've been happily married for 20 years. And I blame this stuff. So let's get into these 12 traditions and talk about them. And I'll bounce back and forth between some stuff in this booklet and just my own experience, strength, and hope. And assuming that I don't get too wordy, I hope we get to the end and we have some time for some back and forth with you guys. But please keep in mind that there's 12 of these things. There's lots of ground to cover here. So tradition 1 says that our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon CoDA unity. Well, first of all, that raises the question, what's unity? That is the spiritual principle at the root of tradition 1, the principle of unity. But what is it? So one thing that it isn't is unison. And that's sometimes when we are looking at our relationships pre-recovery, that's what we think it's supposed to be. Right? These people need to act like me. We need to do this stuff together the same way. Unity does not mean walking in lockstep with somebody else. Unity is 2 or more people moving together in the same direction. Another way to think of it is the musical term harmony. How many musicians do we have in the room? Okay. Harmony is not different people singing the same notes. It's people singing different notes to the same song. And that's what we're trying to get, is that idea of a shared objective and moving together, but not necessarily in unison. When my wife and I rewrote the traditions for our 12 commitments, we spent about 3 months talking about that. A couple times a week we would get together and we would massage the wording. And so basically over a period of 3 months, we negotiated the ground rules for our relationship going forward. Our first commitment to each other is that our personal, our common welfare should come first. Personal growth within our relationship depends upon unity. It's hard to achieve any kind of personal growth in an environment where there's a lot of conflict or resentment. And so consequently, we need to come to not necessarily a commonality of thinking, but a meeting of minds. And the idea of unity suggests a requirement for compromise. The idea that I don't necessarily in these discussions get everything that I want, and my wife doesn't necessarily get everything that she wants. And in fact, that's a bad sign. If I'm winning every argument, if my wife is winning every debate, that does not speak well to unity in our relationship. But if we can come together in the middle, even if it requires several discussions, that is something that we've now both agreed on and we can move forward with. One of the best descriptions for this, and I'm going to give public credit to the guy who's about to raise his hand back there. His name is Greg. Greg, in a meeting on Tradition 1, shared something that has stuck with me ever since. This was some years back, and I've been using it ever since, uncredited. What he said is that in his marriage, he always had wanted him and his wife to be on the same page. But what he realized now from studying the traditions was that what he really, really wanted was for her to be on his page. And what she wanted was for him to be on her page. And what they actually needed at the end of the day was a third page, an our page. And that's what that spiritual principle of unity calls for, is a third page. So we ask ourselves some key questions around this. This action that I am contemplating taking, this statement I'm contemplating on making, is it going to promote or undermine harmony or unity on my partner's part? Oh, and by the way, this thing that I'm contemplating doing, is it going to promote or undermine feelings of unity on my part? How many of us have done that thing we know our partner didn't want us to do, but we did it and we didn't let them know about it, and now we're feeling guilty? And I don't know about you, but if I'm feeling guilty about something, within 24 hours, my brain will figure out a way to make it her fault. And so it becomes important. The best way I've heard that one put was from a speaker in a different fellowship who had a little bit of a foul mouth. He said, "Yeah, I don't do shit I can't tell my old lady about." So there we go. Tradition 1. Tradition 2 says, for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority. A loving higher power is expressed to our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern. Here we're talking about two principles, equality and service. Right? We talk in Tradition 2 about there being an ultimate authority. What's an authority? Who's in charge? So the question comes in any situation. Am I trying to be the authority? Am I trying to be in charge? And Tradition 2 in relationships says, I'm not the authority, you're not the authority. Our higher power is in charge. Tradition 2 is an interesting place in the traditions, because it's the place where we take step 3 together. Right? What did we do in step 3? We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of a loving higher power. And in tradition 2, we agree that that same higher power is in charge of the stuff that we're deciding. I don't know if anybody here has ever consciously taken the third step with another person, but it can be extremely powerful. When we apply this in relationships, we might word it as, for the purpose of our relationship, there is but one authority. A loving higher power is expressed to our mutual conscience. Each of us is a servant of the relationship, and neither of us governs. So then we get into that idea that decisions are made by the mutual conscience, by consensus. That also means that I cannot make fundamental structural changes to whatever this relationship is about. In my marriage, I can't add a wing to the house arbitrarily without reaching consensus with the lady that I share my life with, because that's not how we're trying to do things these days. And in fact, if we can't reach an agreement, what this suggests is that there's no change to the status quo until we reach a decision. It's a great way to figure out how do we handle ties. Right? If she's for and I'm against, or I'm for and she's against, there is no change to the status quo until we come to a consensus. And then that principle of service. You want to have a happy relationship with just about anybody on the planet, cultivate an attitude of service. Do something for someone else without expecting a reward. This also speaks to the idea that if we take on a task, we become a trusted servant. And one of the things that I have talked about repeatedly on the floor of the CoDA Service Conference is that if we're gonna have trusted servants, we have an obligation to trust them, to let them do their job. So it's a case of, I saw an interesting bumper sticker a couple of weeks ago. Ladies, if a man says he's going to do something, there's no need to remind him every 2 years. Okay. So that's a joke. That's clearly a joke, right? Everybody understands that. But I thought it was cute. What my bride has got in the habit of doing is taking her hands off once we've agreed that I'm taking on a job. So I don't feel like I'm being nagged, and I've taken on that responsibility. Now, if I don't meet that responsibility, we're going to have a discussion. And the same thing when she takes on a task, that I don't need to look over her shoulder and say, I would do that differently. Right? We trust each other to do the things that we've committed to doing. And the idea is that we strive to be of service to each other rather than being in charge or in control. What's important here is that we consider the needs of the relationship rather than fighting for our own agenda when we're trying to work toward a consensus. The same thing that we ask our trusted servants, our delegates, to do at the CoDA Service Conference, right? If you go to the service manual, delegate to the CoDA Service Conference should be voting on the floor based on what they think is the good of the fellowship, not based on their personal interest, not based even on representing their voting entity, but based on what's good for the fellowship as a whole. And that's what we try to do when we sit down and look at decisions within our marriage. What's good for us together 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, as opposed to what do I want to have for supper? I should have brought my other glasses. So 2 key questions that we ask when we're working tradition 2 might be, will this decision serve the best interest of the relationship, or is it limited to my own narrow interests? And am I trying to be the authority? Am I trying to be in charge? Tradition 3 says that the only requirement for membership in CoDA is a desire for healthy and loving relationships. And here we talk about the spiritual principle of inclusion or acceptance. The idea that when we're deciding who should be a CoDA member, we want to make it as inclusive as possible. We want to reduce or eliminate any possible obstacles to membership in this little club here. So how many of you are new in CoDA? Okay, welcome. We want you to know that we're delighted that you're here. I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is, if you want healthy and loving relationships, you're in. That's it. That's all you've got to do. You don't have to get a sponsor. You don't have to work the steps. You don't have to practice or study these silly sounding traditions. You don't have to read the literature. None of it. As long as you want healthy and loving relationships, you're entitled to the chair that you're sitting in right now. Now, if you want to get better, we do recommend that you do all those other things. So that's the good news. The bad news is, if you're here because you want healthy and loving relationships, you're surrounded by people who haven't got a clue about healthy and loving relationships. Because if we knew about healthy and loving relationships, we'd be out there having them. We never would have got here in the first place. But as we've hung around here, I think most of the veteran members here will agree with me, we learn a little bit about healthier, more loving relationships. That idea of progress, not perfection. That I still, to this day, I don't know what a healthy marriage looks like, but I can tell you that my marriage today is a lot healthier than it was when I got here. So the only requirement for membership is this desire for healthy and loving relationships. We don't require that you share any opinions, goals or aspirations or anything. And we want to do the same thing with our relationships, with our personal relationships. What is required to be in a relationship with me for a gas jockey? Okay? Well, hopefully he is competent at pumping gas. As long as he's good at that, I'm willing to give this relationship a shot. Okay. So for my marriage, for our 12 commitments, the only requirement for membership in our marriage is a desire to be in the marriage combined with the willingness to make it work. Now think about that. As long as both partners want to be there, that's the first piece of that requirement. Because if one of us doesn't want to be there, what's the point? Combined with the willingness to make it work. The willingness to get off the couch and do something about it. Okay? There might be relationships where I'd like to be in that relationship, but I'm not willing to put in the effort. And if that's the case, that relationship is bound to fail. So, desire to be there combined with the willingness to make it work. We talk about in Tradition 3 what we sometimes call the 4 commitments, different set of commitments. You have 2 people, A and B, and they're in a relationship with each other. For that relationship to work in the long term, A has to be committed to their own growth. And second commitment, they have to be committed to B's growth. B, on the other hand, has to be committed to their own growth, and they have to be committed to A's growth. If any one of those pieces is missing, that relationship tends to be unsatisfying and will fail in the long run. So the idea is to have that commitment to do what's necessary to make this thing work. At the same time, removing any unnecessary requirements. Because when we put up unnecessary requirements, what are we really trying to do? We're trying to control. We're trying to hold people at arm's length so they don't get in too close and they have the opportunity to hurt me. So we want to disarm those things because all they are is a method of avoiding intimacy or vulnerability. Yeah?
I'm sorry, can you say that last part again? I think I need to hear that one again. About
When we put up unnecessary requirements, that's simply a measure of control. It's a way of trying to hold people at arm's length, at a distance, so they can't get close. And so we don't have to be vulnerable. We don't have to risk intimacy where they might have an opportunity to hurt us.
Can you give an example, please?
All sorts of things can be put out as spurious requirements. She doesn't drive the right kind of car, so I can't be seen with her. He doesn't read the same kind of books I read, so clearly we can't be together. At the end of the day, when we look at those in the cold light of day, they tend to be of the nature of who cares. But I don't know about your head, but mine will make that look really logical, given the opportunity.
Yeah.
Katie?
I'm wondering about what commitment to your partner's growth looks like.
Oh, that's a really good
Yeah.
question. Okay, so we're both heavily involved in our recovery. Part of my commitment to my partner's growth is to support her when she is doing the work that's necessary to her spiritual growth, like taking calls from sponsees. We're sitting down to supper, and she takes a phone call. Now, I have to do two things here. I have to support her, and I have to trust her. Because sponsorship is where we learn boundaries. Right? Sponsorship is where I learned when that phone rings and I'm just sitting down to supper to be able to say to a sponsee, I'm just sitting down to supper with my bride, can I call you back in a half an hour? Instead of taking that call and leaving my wife at the dinner table. On the other hand, periodically, my wife will take a call and she'll get 6 words in, she'll get up from the dinner table, she'll walk down to her den. And I have to trust her judgment that that was a call that couldn't wait. And so I'm going to sit there and I'm going to eat my dinner and support her by not taking it personally, not getting upset about it. So, does that help?
Okay.
Yeah.
Follow-up question to that. How to support the other person's growth without controlling the other person's growth or assuming based on what I think how the other person should grow or how they have said in the past that they want to grow is.
Remember we talked about cultivating an attitude of service.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you who are married, particularly the men, I have a gift for you, and it's a simple phrase: how can I help? Not this is how I want to help you. How can I help? But a lot of times it's simply a matter of not making an unnecessary fuss while she's doing what she needs to do, or her not making a fuss when I'm doing what I need to do, and not taking it personally that I'm taking time away to spend with the sponsee instead of spending it going for a walk with her or the dogs.
Yeah.
So those unnecessary requirements, as I say, they raise obstacles to being in a relationship with me. And the question I want to ask myself there is, how difficult do I want to make it to be in a relationship with me? Ideally, in most cases, I want to make it as simple as possible. I want to remove those unnecessary requirements. Tradition 4. And I'm gonna try to pause periodically for questions. But, if you do have something, feel free to raise your hand. Tradition 4. Each group should be autonomous, except in matters affecting other groups or CoDA as a whole. This was the first tradition that really hit home for me, and it opened the door to understanding all of the others. It also was the one that I learned it at home and it helped me to understand it in my CoDA group. Because this one is about boundaries. Actually, all of the traditions are about boundaries, but this one is the in-your-face one about boundaries, because it talks about where do I stop and someone else begins. Or in a relationship, where do we stop and those other people begin? So in my marriage, our fourth commitment is that each of us should be autonomous, except in matters affecting our partner or our family or the wider community as a whole. The idea that my decisions about my life are mine to make, unless and until they affect my partner or some of those other people. Our decisions about our marriage are ours to make, unless and until someone else is directly affected. Now, when I got to my first CoDA meeting, my world had shrunk to me and this woman who was praying for me to die. And she was packing her bags to leave, which is how I ended up falling apart. I ended up on the couch of the therapist who sent me here. But she never quite got out the door. And when she decided that she was going to give this thing one more try, and I made no signs of leaving, you were hard-pressed to look around the landscape and find anybody on either side of our family who supported that decision. All of my family thought I should dump the bitch. And all of her family thought that she should get as far away from that asshole as she could. And so there were some strong opinions, and there were some people who were very angry with both of us for deciding to stay together. And guess what? They didn't get a vote. Whose marriage? Our marriage. And so Tradition 4 supports that idea that we get to make the decisions about our marriage unless and until someone else is directly affected. They may have opinions, and we're willing to listen to opinions, but they do not get a vote. The idea here is that principle of live and let live. Take that and break it down. Live. Whose life? My life. Our life. Let live. Let them live their life. That is the fundamentals of recovery from codependence right there. Live my life, let them live their life.
Jim, may I ask a question?
I'm Ritchard, but sure.
How do you translate this into a non-intimate relationship marriage type? How would you...
Like a friendship or,
Yeah,
okay,
or
sure.
children, or your own kids, your family.
That's a really good one, and we're just coming up to that because I have adult children. I have 3 daughters, and all of whom have taken directions that I found distressing. And that idea of live and let live, the idea of autonomy. Their decisions about their lives are theirs to make. I have opinions. And as a loving father, I will take the opportunity to express those opinions. But what I've learned to do in CoDA is to be able to say to them the same as I would say to a sponsee. I can't tell you what to do, but this is what I hope you'll do. Well, I can't tell you what to do, but have you considered this? And then leave them alone to make their decision, because it's their decision, not mine. So, some years ago, my wife was offered a transfer. We're from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, which is 2 provinces to the left of where you're sitting right now. And she works for the Canadian government, and she was offered a move to Winnipeg because they were creating what they were billing as a center of excellence in the field that she was working in. And she wanted to continue doing that, so they offered to move us. And so we had to consider whether to move from Saskatoon to Winnipeg, which Winnipeg is 1 province to the left of where you are. And that was a hard decision for us to make. We were contemplating leaving our our friends, our families, our CoDA community, all of it, and uprooting and going somewhere where between us we knew one person. There was one guy in Winnipeg that I'd been sponsoring long distance for about a year and a half. that was it. And when we made the decision to move, we had a lot of people who were very upset with us. Family going, "You can't move. You'd be so far away from us." Well, understand that. That's a risk we're willing to take. We had people in our recovery community saying, "You can't move. We need you." But at the end of the day, it was our decision to make, and it was a good decision for us. We made that move knowing that while we didn't know anybody there, we had friends and family that we just hadn't met yet. Because that's the way it works in these circles. So we same thing, 5 years later, Karen got offered a move back to Saskatoon. And we had to go through that same kind of decision making. And a lot of stuff was involved there, not just leaving our recovery community, or not just our family, but uprooting my career the second time in 5 years, all of that stuff. But ultimately, we decided that Saskatoon is the place that we wanted to retire and be there in the long term. We might as well let the government pay for the move. And so we took that move back. And as a consequence, we have like a second home, a second family in that Winnipeg community. The family that we had there that we hadn't met yet when we moved. And some of them are here today, which is why I'm a little teary. Okay. Tradition 5. Tradition 5 is a game changer. In every 12-step fellowship that matters, the 5th tradition defines the primary purpose. And think about this. If you can define the purpose of any activity, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? Doesn't your chance of success go up? Because you can do the things that support that purpose. And by the way, not do the things that distract from or undermine that purpose. And so, without an identified purpose, it's really hard to even measure success, isn't it? So what we do is we look at, what's the purpose of a CoDA group? Anybody? Okay. I'll give you a hint. I don't. Sorry.
To help the still sick and suffering.
There we go. I don't ask trick questions. The answer is right there in the tradition. We have one primary purpose: to carry a message of hope to someone who needs it. Which is why we consider the newcomer the most important person at every meeting. Right? They're the reason we have the meeting. Everything else that we do in recovery, we do outside the meeting room. We do it in coffee shops. We do it over the phone. We do it in conferences. We do it across kitchen tables. The point of the meeting is to give the newcomer somewhere to find us, somewhere to get plugged in and find a sponsor and get on this road. But the real recovery work doesn't happen during that 1 hour of the meeting. It happens during the other hours of the week. So at the meeting itself, we take the perspective that that newcomer is always the most important person at the meeting, which is why we want to make sure that we structure the meeting to meet the needs of the newcomer first. But we can take that same idea and apply that to any relationship. So some of the examples in the book are, for a marriage, our marriage has but one purpose: to serve as an expression of our higher power's love. Or for a friendship, our friendship has but one primary purpose: to enrich both our lives. Or for an employer-employee relationship, our relationship has but one primary purpose: to further the success of the organization. Or for a sponsor and sponsee, our relationship has but one primary purpose: to enhance both our recoveries. So if we can identify that purpose, do the things that support that. So within my marriage, right, I like the idea of being somebody who has a primary purpose in his marriage. Right? Our marriage has but one primary purpose: to serve as an expression of our higher power's love. We do this, we go on to expand on that a little bit. We do this by practicing the 12 steps, by encouraging and nurturing each other's growth, and by welcoming and loving our friends and family. Now, that's a pretty high-minded sounding statement, right? Right? It sounds pretty good. Doesn't mean a damn thing if we don't act on it. And that's the key here, is not just identifying the purpose, but taking the actions that support it. If that statement does not inform our actions, I'm just blowing hot air. So that statement of primary purpose, for example, influences what kind of house we buy. How? Well, we're engaged in 12-step work, and we're encouraging and nurturing each other's growth. We need a house that has a big open area in it that we can host meetings and retreats and potlucks and those kinds of little in-home recovery gatherings. We both sponsor a ton of people. We need a house where 5th steps can happen. So we have a 5th step room.
Wow.
We travel in circles where it's frequent that somebody just cannot be at home that night. And so we have a very comfortable guest room. And that statement of purpose defines the kind of house we buy. And it covers all sorts of other decisions that we make, but that's just a really handy example. So if that statement of purpose does not drive action, it's just lip service. It's just hot air. Tradition 6. Tradition 6, we're talking about taking that primary purpose and making it the focus, not getting distracted from it. It's the idea that, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. So it's not getting distracted by outside entanglements. So some of us can be really passionate about supporting particular organizations or causes, but we don't bring that into CoDA, right? We're supposed to leave our outside affiliations at the door, which is great because what it does is it insulates us. It means people who have different political views, different social views, can share a meeting and not have to worry about getting into conflict over that kind of stuff. The same principle applies in our personal, family, work, and romantic relationships. In Tradition 6, we can see a suggestion that we should never allow outside commitments to get in the way of our focus on any relationship, and that one member of the relationship can't speak for the relationship as a whole. Okay, so for a married couple, one might restate Tradition 6 to read, "Neither of us should ever endorse, finance, or otherwise commit our family to any outside enterprise without prior consultation, lest problems of money, property, or ego divert us from our primary spiritual aim." What this suggests is that I can't speak for us. I can't speak for the commitment of any resource that belongs to the relationship. We talk about time, talent, and treasure. Right? If I'm committing excess time on my part, or excess money on our part or my part, that is unfair to my partner. And so we want to talk about that. At the same time, I cannot commit her time or talents. And the example that I like to use there is that our kids used to wrestle. And the wrestling club would have this annual fundraiser bake sale. And I remember going down there to pick up my daughters from wrestling practice one day, And some of the other parents said to me, "Hey, Richard, is Karen going to make those cookies that she did for the bake sale last year?" And I said, "Sure she is." Then I went home to find out that she wasn't. Now, and this is the way the codependent mind works, at least for me. I got so upset with her because she was making me look bad. I've learned not to do that. So we don't make promises of someone else's behavior. We don't commit family resources without that prior consultation and consensus. Yes.
Well, codependent. So if this was easy, everyone would be doing it. So I'm married to an opposite. We knew we were opposite after the first date 43 years ago. We have very different priorities. I'm just wondering what your experience with yourselves or others where this,
What do we?
this works with two very different people.
What do we do with different priorities? Well, first of all, I think that's a great question. Applies less to this than to most of the other ones we've already talked about. But the idea, when we have different priorities, we have different perspectives, is to, first of all, this idea that I don't speak for my partner, and I don't allow my partner to speak for me. And within my marriage, I'm lucky because I get to share my life with somebody, and I also get to share my recovery with. That's not the case in every relationship. How many of you are in a relationship with someone who's not in 12-step recovery? Okay, so I mean it's pretty common, but the principles, we can still discuss these principles with our partner and say, I don't think that we should speak for each other. I make this commitment not to speak for you in the future, and by the way, I won't let you speak for me. Right? If we come to a consensus, then we come to a joint decision and make a joint announcement about a commitment on our part. Does that seem fair? Okay. So how many, oh yeah?
Can I ask you a question? Melanie recently found out I'm also codependent. Okay, so the idea of independence when you're like literally outside of a relationship is my time 100% belongs to me. I'll do whatever that I want with it. I'll call you when I'm available, right? And then, so where's that line between, I'll do whatever I want with my time and I'll let you know when I'm available to see you, to like, what you're explaining in terms of like the time becomes like belongs to the relationship? Like, how does
There's only one right answer to that,
Okay.
and that is whatever the two of you work out. Okay, every relationship's different. Your mileage may vary, and my point here is that is not that I can't commit to doing service work and taking my time out of the house. It's that when I do that, I need to keep my partner in the loop. And we need to make sure, I want to make sure, because this is an important relationship to me, that I'm putting sufficient time into that relationship, whatever looks reasonable to the two of us. So this is where some of us find, we have this policy of before I take on a major service commitment, I'm going to have two conversations, one with my spouse and one with my sponsor. Right? I want to make sure that I'm not overcommitting myself, I'm not burning myself out, I am not robbing Peter to pay Paul and starving the relationship that's most important to me in favor of this service commitment that looks like it could be a lot of fun, but frankly somebody else could do it. Does that make sense? So how many of you have made commitments on the part of your partner without asking? Yeah. How'd that go? Okay. How many of you have had your partner make commitments on your behalf without consultation? How'd that feel? So we try not to do those things. Tradition 7 says every CoDA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contribution. That spiritual principle of self-support. This, to a great extent, talks about, particularly in relationships, the same kind of stuff as Promise 6, where I learned to see myself as equal to others. My new and renewed relationships are all with equal partners. In any relationship, my marriage, my work, my family, my CoDA group, am I pulling my weight? Am I contributing my fair share, time, talent, and treasure? Not just money, but effort. You know, in my home, am I pulling my weight? Okay? A lot of us as guys need to ask ourselves that question honestly, right? And so we end up in recovery trying to cultivate new behaviors compared to what we used to do. At least I have. I have little tricks because I don't think of this stuff, but I have little tricks to remind myself to get up and do the dishes, to throw a load of laundry in, to do those kinds of things that if I don't contribute, my wife gets resentful as hell. And when I sit back and I look at it honestly, of course she does. Why wouldn't she? And it's a matter of taking responsibility for me. This is the self-esteem tradition. That idea that when I take responsibility for me, when I'm contributing my fair share in my CoDA group, I feel good about me. When I am taking care of myself physically, I'm making my doctor's appointments, I'm making my dentist appointments, I'm getting out and getting some exercise, I feel better. I feel better, and I feel better about me. When I do my step work, because I am responsible for myself spiritually, I feel better about me. So there's 3 sides to this, to this particular tradition. And that's the first one, is that idea of being responsible for myself. For some of us, for the first time in our lives. Right? I don't know about you, but I spent most of my life thinking your problems look way more interesting than mine. Right? If you had a problem, I was ready to jump in there and try to solve it for you, because I love being the hero. My drug of choice was a damsel in distress. Right? And so if I could jump in and rescue you from something, man, that was the best. But if I had a problem, man, that just looked overwhelming. And I would curl up on the floor in the fetal position, wait for an enabler to come along and solve it for me. These days, I try to let you have your problem and work on mine. And I feel a whole lot better about Ritchard as a result. The second side of this is that when I have a problem that I can't solve on my own, part of being self-supporting is recognizing that and being responsible for asking for help. We teach newcomers this right from the beginning. What do we say? Go ask someone to be your sponsor. No, we're not going to assign you a sponsor. You got to pick somebody and actually ask them. And that act of asking for help is being responsible for your own recovery. If there's something that you cannot do for yourself, you've got to find a source for that. And then the third side is that idea of helping others. A lot of us get here by being overly helpful, right? Anybody identify with that idea? Yeah. Okay. And we find that we can be helpful in unhealthy ways to our own detriment and even to the detriment of the person that we're trying to help, right? So what we do is in recovery, we try to remember to ask a series of questions. Right? Anytime that we're contemplating helping somebody, before we commit to that, first question, did they ask? If they didn't ask for help, you know what? Helping without being invited is criticism. So, second question, is it necessary? Do they actually need the help? Or am I doing for somebody something that they can and should be doing for themselves? Third, will it be appreciated? Based on my past experience with helping this particular person, are they going to appreciate it? And finally, can I afford it? And when I can I afford it does not just mean money. Can I afford it financially, physically, emotionally, and spiritually?
Time.
Yeah. Can I afford the time, or is it going to burn me out? Can I afford the emotional investment, or is it going to leave me a mess and I've got a job interview tomorrow? Can I afford it spiritually? Am I going to walk away from this with a resentment that I can't afford to have? So we ask those 4 questions. Now, in the booklet, it says only if the answer to all 4 of these questions is yes, do we then try to help. I don't quite agree with that personally. It's if the answer to any one of these questions is no, then I want to think about it. I want to talk it out with someone else. I may still make the choice to go and help, but I want to make sure that I've given it serious thought and consideration first. So the questions that we look at when we're considering Tradition 7 is, am I making a reasonable request? Or am I doing for someone else something that they can and should be doing for themselves? Tradition 8. Tradition 8 for me was the big game changer. Codependence Anonymous should remain forever non-professional, but our service centers may employ special workers. And Tradition 8, it's a pet peeve of mine. I'm going to get it off my chest, then we'll move on. Tradition 8 gets misunderstood, and as a result, I often find myself dismayed in meetings on Tradition 8. Because most of the time you go to a meeting on Tradition 8, and sooner or later somebody's going to say, yeah, it's really great that none of us are professionals and we're all equal here. Well, that's true. Those are very good things. Tradition 2 says that we're all equal here. Tradition 6 says we leave our outside affiliations, including our professions, at the door. This isn't the case of 2 + 6 = 8. When Bill Wilson introduced those traditions to Alcoholics Anonymous, he purposely set out to not be repetitive. And so it seems unlikely that he would have a tradition that's a recap of 2 others. And so that's not what he's talking about. What they were talking about is that what we do here, we do non-professionally. We do based on the real meaning of the word amateur. Okay? Remember the old days before they allowed professionals into the the Olympics? And those were all amateur athletes. What's an amateur? Somebody, break the word down, it means for the love of. Somebody who's doing it for the love of it. What that means is that we're amateurs here. We offer help to that newcomer who's still suffering for fun and for free. Right? Simply for the love of it. The idea that we don't charge for the help that someone finds here. What's that sound like? Spiritual principle of unconditional love. Love without a price tag. You know, when we look back in our pre-recovery lives, how many of us experienced conditional love? How many of us practiced conditional love? You know, that's what I grew up knowing, was like, how much you love me depended entirely on how much I pleased you today. And I had to get into recovery to find out that no, that's not true. That's not what real love is. Real love is unconditional. And so we'll learn that lesson here in these rooms, and then we take it home. And that's a game changer. Because it meant that I could go to my wife now. The old days, before recovery, I would tell my wife I loved her a lot. Pretty much every day. I love you. Do you hear the hook? Do you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, what's the price tag there? I want to hear it back. And if I didn't hear it back, I would be set up for 3 days of depression and obsession. So these days, what I've learned is to commit to this idea of unconditional love. That when I tell my wife today that I love her, I'm giving her a piece of information that I want her to have. And sometimes she says it back, and if she does, that's a great bonus. But I don't ever tell her I love her when I want to hear it. I tell it to her when I want her to know it. And that's the difference. So how do we practice unconditional love? Well, one of the great ways to practice that is random acts of kindness. Doing something unexpected for somebody else just because, without thought of reward. And by the way, how many of you got here with low self-esteem? Just a couple. We talk here about wanting to build our self-esteem. If you want to build self-esteem, I learned here, perform esteemable acts. Do good things. When I can engage in random acts of service, when I can engage in anonymous good deeds, the idea of doing a good turn for somebody else and not getting caught, I feel really good about me. And so that's the attitude, and it's not a question of doing this every day to make myself feel better. It's a question of cultivating an attitude. The idea that I don't need to be rewarded for loving somebody. So what we look at in relationships is, am I putting a price tag on doing the loving thing? How expensive is it to be in a relationship with me? Or is this other person charging a fee for their, yeah, I'll be right with you. They're charging a price for their love. Because if I'm in a relationship where where I'm constantly seeing the price that I'm being charged for their love, maybe I want to think about what's going on in that relationship. Yes, at the back.
So two kind of questions. It's the same question but two angles. So if I want to hear "I love you" from a partner, is it fair to ask for that? First part. Second part, what do I need to deal with in myself if I feel like I need to hear that?
If we're needing that external validation, then that is an issue that I would take to my sponsor, for starters. It's fair to have a conversation with our partner, or the person that we're in a relationship with. Going, you know, what's going on in this relationship? Right? Because I don't hear you tell me that you love me. On the other hand, have you a piece of outside literature, the 5 love languages? Are you familiar with it?
Yes.
Okay. It may be that you're in a relationship with somebody who has a different way of saying that they're in love, right? That they love you. Right? My wife had to learn my love languages, and I had to learn hers because they're different. My wife's big into acts of service. doing things for somebody to express your love. That's what she learned growing up. Whereas I'm big on affirmations. I'm very verbal about it. And so we've learned to kind of move to the middle and speak each other's love languages a little more. Fair enough?
Thanks.
Okay. Tradition 9. CoDA as such ought never be organized, but we may create service boards or committees directly responsible to those they serve. Now, at one level, this is kind of the running gag every time something goes wrong in a meeting, right? Our group says such ought never be organized. Okay. What it's really about is that we ought not to be rigidly organized. It's not that we don't have some organization. I mean, you look around what's happening this week, of course we have some organization. But the idea is that we strive for the bare minimum organization in order to accomplish whatever it is that we're trying to do. So that, or in other words, the spiritual principle of flexibility, or adaptability. We want to avoid the rigidity of over-organizing or rigidity of thinking, right? How many of us got here with really, really strict black and white thinking? You're for me or against me. It's good or it's bad. Right? Turns out, the kinds of people who end up here, we live in the extremes. Right? We're all the way left or all the way right. We're all the way up or all the way down. And I don't know about you, but I was never terribly interested in that middle. Turns out that most of the rest of the planet lives in the middle. And that a big measure of recovery is my ability to find and be comfortable in that middle. So what does this mean when we apply it at the group level? Probably the simplest way to put it is nobody owns a job, right? There's no such thing as GSR for life, right? There's no such thing as treasurer forever. I mean, usually we deal in 1 year or 3 year terms in service positions in CoDA. The idea being that we take you and we put you into a job, by the way, that you're not qualified for. And we tell you to sink or swim. And by the way, if you screw it up, we love you more. And just about the time that you're starting to get good at it, we kick you out and put somebody else in. So that's the idea that we're trying, that rotation of service that avoids us from becoming organized along rigid lines and having entrenched personalities in service positions and that sort of thing. We take that principle home and it becomes our marriage as such ought never be organized, but we may temporarily appoint one or the other to special tasks as they suit our interests and talents. Okay? That's the 9th commitment in my marriage. By the way, a lot of those 12 commitments are used as examples in this book. Anytime that says one couple, we're probably that couple. So for example, we're going on a trip. One of us needs to be the travel agent. Sometimes it's me, sometimes it's my bride. So our oldest daughter's wedding is coming up in October, and I'm currently researching hotels and Airbnbs in Calgary in order to make that work on our end. So then when I've got something, I will report back, because what I am is a service board or committee directly responsible to those they serve, right? So I report back to the committee of the whole, which is the two of us, and we make a decision. Another thought is contractor in the house. Okay? We moved back from Winnipeg to Saskatoon. We bought a house that needed some work. We needed new windows. We needed this. We needed that. And we appointed my wife as the general contractor. Right? So she's dealing with all the tradesmen and all of that kind of stuff. Mainly because she's got a better eye for that stuff than I do. So we're going to do the bathroom. She goes, okay. Talks to the contractor, and he shows her a bunch of samples, and she shortlists those and brings those to me, and between us we come up with a decision, and it goes back to the contract. But she's the one who's acting as our general contractor. Next time that we have something happening, it may be me as the general contractor, and it may be her as the travel agent. Okay? But that's the idea, is that the responsibilities pass back and forth depending on what's going on and who's equipped to take it on. And that we're not stuck in a role forever. Right? I do have to admit that I've temporarily been appointed the tech support guy in my house for about 28 years. But every once in a while, my wife decides that she wants to learn something on the technical front, and I just stand back, take my hands off. It used to be that if she wanted to learn something technical, I would get offended. She's trying to take my job away. So now I can let her have that. And by doing this, by passing this stuff back and forth, we get to both be active participants in the dynamics of our marriage. Because nobody is in charge of a healthy relationship, we have both the opportunity and the obligation to be active participants in that relationship. This is one of the ways in which we demonstrate the willingness to make it work that we talked about in Tradition 3. Ultimately, Tradition 9 teaches us to deal flexibly with our relationships and our relationship partners. We're reminded to allow others and ourselves the opportunity to grow and change, with an emphasis on serving the relationship through active participation. Cool? How am I doing for time here?
15 minutes.
15 minutes, okay. 15 minutes, 3 to go. Let's see what we did here. Tradition 10. Our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, films, TV, and all other forms of public communication.
That's 11.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I was so proud of myself for updating that too. Because this particular printing predates when we changed Tradition 11. Okay, CoDA has no opinion on outside issues, hence the CoDA name will never be drawn into public controversy. That single statement begs the question, what's an outside issue? Okay. I would submit to you that an outside issue is any issue that is outside of our defined primary purpose. It's not central to our primary purpose. And what it comes down to is really simply the principle of if it isn't pertinent to our primary purpose, let it go. This is the tradition that says, can I allow someone else the right to be wrong? Can I agree to disagree agreeably? Many of us, when we were practicing our codependent patterns, would question the validity of a relationship if we disagreed on nearly anything. How can I stay with them if they don't believe in the same fill in the blank here? How can I possibly be in a relationship with someone that thinks that way? If the disagreement is an issue that really is fundamental to the relationship, it may be that everyone would be better off letting go of that relationship. If it's central, if it's a core issue, and you can't agree. He wants kids, she doesn't. And he really desperately wants to be a father, she really desperately does not want to have kids. That's probably not a marriage made in heaven, right? Okay. So if it's really fundamental to the relationship, it may be better for everyone to let go of that relationship. However, we often apply the same thinking to issues that really had no importance to the relationship. I can't be with her, she doesn't like the same brand of potato chips. So in recovery, we learn to put first things first. That means that we cultivate an understanding of which issues are central to the relationship and which are outside issues. And then we work at letting go. We learn to accept that our relationship patterns, our relationship partners may have differing opinions. That idea of giving them the right to be wrong. How many of you know who Dave Tiger Williams is? One hockey fan in the room. Oh, two. Okay. Dave Tiger Williams, in the late 70s, early 80s, was the preeminent enforcer in the National Hockey League. He led the league in penalty minutes for most of his career, holds the all-time career record for penalty minutes, which means he did a lot of fighting. Okay. Toward the end of his career, he was playing in Vancouver. And now, I mean, you think of your prototypical cliche hockey goon, and he's playing in Vancouver. They're playing a home game, it's televised. So he gets home to find out that his daughter watched the game that night. And she stayed up to say goodnight to him. And she says to him, "Daddy, how come you have to, all those other guys get to skate around on the ice and you have to sit in that little box?" And he says it never occurred to him until that moment that he didn't have to show up for every fight he was invited to. And so he did that season. He stopped showing up for every fight, and as a result, he actually led the Canucks in scoring that season, in both goals and points. Had his career high point total that season, and he still led the league in penalty minutes. He just didn't get quite as many. A massive improvement, and that's simply from not showing up for every fight he was invited to. So between my bride and me, we when we worked out our 12 commitments, what we came up with was outside issues have no place between us. We as individuals are free to follow our personal truth, but we must never commit our partner or our marriage to outside controversy. The idea that we don't bring outside controversial issues into our marriage. I don't know how my wife votes. I kind of have a hunch, but I do not know. I don't know what charitable donations she makes. I know she makes a lot of them. She does them through the United Way at work. And it's none of my business. And if I remember that it's none of my business, I can't get into a disagreement with her about it. Cool?
Yep.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
And I don't know if this is like just to be transparent, I don't know if this is genuine just because I'm like a little triggered by that, but doesn't that go against what you were saying before about like how you have to when you make decisions that affect the marriage? So like, let's just say it's charitable donations, that's financial.
That's a really good point. So we need to remember that first of all, every couple's different, but also that these traditions, none of them exist in isolation from the others. They kind of blend into each other. So when we talk about, she makes donations at work to a certain point. If it goes above a certain level, now we're gone beyond her money and into our money, and then we have to have a conversation, right? So neither one of us will go out and spend large sums of money, even if we've got it in our own savings account, without discussing it with our partner. But we both have situations where, my paycheck comes in and I've got this much that goes into an account that's just my money. And then this bigger chunk that goes into an account that we share that's our money. And she does the same, and she makes a lot more money than I do, so her contributions are quite a bit bigger. But it's the same principle, that neither one of us is going to spend more than a couple $100 of our own money even without discussing it with our partner. but she's perfectly free to make whatever donations she wants, as long as she's not giving away half her paycheck, right? Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Very good question. Tradition 11. Our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, TV, and films, and all other forms of public communication. Okay, that's the version that's a result of the fact that we needed to complicate it a couple years ago. Nothing is ever so perfect that a group of codependents can't find a way to complicate it. So, what's the spiritual principle here? Anonymity. But let's remember, because we're coming up to tradition 12, that there's different definitions for anonymity. And the anonymity we're talking about here is unnamed or unrecognized. The idea that we keep our identities close to the vest. Why do we do that? Tradition 11 safeguards the code of fellowship by preventing our public profile from being identified with any one member. No single person speaks for CoDA, and CoDA's success is not measured against the recovery or illness of a single prominent member. I remember some years ago, a prominent actress was in rehab for a while, and after rehab, she was referred to treatment for codependency. And then she was on a talk show sometime after that talking about how much she absolutely adored Codependents Anonymous. And then when about a year later she got herself into a bunch of trouble, I remember thinking to myself, I'm really glad that nobody's remembering that previous story. Because we don't want that. We don't want the worth of Codependents Anonymous to be identified with anybody, with any particular person's success or failure. In other words, we want to keep the personalities out of it. We want to keep the egos out of it. Furthermore, when we engage in our primary purpose of carrying CoDA's message to other codependents, we do so using the tool of attraction rather than promotion. Simply put, we live our lives as an example of how CoDA has changed us for the better, rather than making promises to others of what CoDA might do for them. To the best of our ability, we show rather than tell. What is it that we're supposed to share in our meetings? Experience, strength, and hope. Whose experience, strength, and hope? Ours. Yeah. We're not supposed to give advice. We're not supposed to give opinions. We're supposed to say, this is what was going on, this is what I did, and this is how it turned out. Experience and strength and hope. When we can do that, it's a pretty clean exchange. And we can also add on to that, my favorite tagline, your mileage may vary. This is what I did. Might work for you, might not. So taking this home, in my 12 commitments, our personal opinions should be communicated openly, honestly, and directly with respect and courtesy. We need to always maintain personal humility in all our affairs. The idea here that when we get into discussions about just about anything, that I don't need her to come to a way of thinking simply because I said so. Right? It's much more influential if I walk the talk. And that is a big one. Yeah, that's right here. Attraction rather than promotion suggests that we can be more effective by being less controlling. This applies to encouraging recovery in our families. It also applies to any other idea, change, or solution that we may advocate. Forced change is rarely lasting change. I'll say that again. Forced change is rarely lasting change. Tradition 11 asks us to set an example rather than to give orders or instructions. It encourages us to walk the walk. I think that may be the single most important question I can ask myself in my recovery is, am I walking the walk? Or am I just talking the talk? I have a favorite speaker in another fellowship who says, I may not walk like I talk, but thank God I don't walk like I think. So what happens when we apply Tradition 11 in our lives? Well, what happens, communication becomes more honest. Because we're saying what we actually think instead of putting up that facade of what we want the other person to think we think or think we feel. There's a guy in AA years ago who used to talk about how in these circles we don't have relationships. I have this facade in front of me of what I want you to see, and you have a facade in front of you of what you want me to see, and we don't have a relationship, we're just bumping facades. And when we want a real relationship, we have to drop the facade. And we hope the other person will drop theirs. But the best way to convince them to drop their facade is to drop our facade. To show them that we're willing to do that and hope that they will join us in it. So what happens when we start practicing traditional 11 is that our communications become more honest. And we start saying what we actually think, we start doing what we actually say. And we start approaching this definition of rigorous honesty or program honesty, right? Like a lot of us get here cash register honest. I would never take a penny out of that cash register, right? But how many of us got here rigorously honest, where our thoughts and our words and our actions all agree with each other? And that's what we learn to do. And finally, tradition 12. Anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities. So the anonymity that we're talking about here is not the identity-based anonymity we were talking about a minute ago. We'll get into what it is in a minute. But if we're describing tradition 12 and anonymity as the spiritual foundation of all those other traditions, what's that mean? It means that we can and should consider all of those traditions through the lens of anonymity. And the anonymity that we're talking about in tradition 12 is the idea of selflessness, the idea that it's not all about me. Okay? I got here, and I talk a lot about how from the minute I got to my first meeting, everything that happens here has worked in direct opposition to the effects of my illness, my codependence. Well, my codependence it's a disease of perception, right? It lurks inside me and it changes the way I see the world around me in order to manipulate my behavior. But what it leverages is my defects of character, my selfishness, my self-centeredness, my dishonesty, and my fear. Those are the things that it uses. Self-centered fear is the chief activator of every bad behavior I have. And this particular tradition talks about anonymity or selflessness, the idea that it's not all about me. Right? I went through life as the egomaniac with the inferiority complex. Right? I'm not much, but I'm all I think about. Right? Or I am the piece of shit at the center of the universe. Bad things are happening over here, it must be my fault. Those people are grumpy, they must be mad at me. And those are the inputs that I base all my actions on, because my head's telling me that, yeah, they really are angry at me. I don't know what, I gotta figure out what, and I've got to do contingency planning in case it's this, or this. And next thing I know, I'm burning myself out and driving them crazy, by the way, trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. So what we learn here is not all about me. Sometimes their underwear's too tight. Sometimes they had a bad bagel for breakfast. It's not about me. So we take the same idea, that idea of selflessness. If it's not all about me, and apply it at home. Anonymity is the spiritual foundation of our marriage, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities. What principles? How about the principles that we've been talking about in these traditions? What personalities? I used to think, when I first started looking at the traditions, that the point of the traditions was to protect CoDA from, and me, from the impact of all your toxic personalities. What I've come to realize is that the purpose of practicing the traditions is to protect the relationships I care about, this fellowship that I care about, the marriage that I care about, from the impact of my personality. To be the insulation between my defects of character and these people that I care about. So we learn to cultivate these litmus test questions that we talk about in this book, and I'm not going to get into a bunch of them other than, principles like unity. Will this decision promote or undermine unity? Primary purpose. Will this support or undermine our primary purpose? At the end, though, you can condense them all to one simple idea. What's the loving thing to do? I talk a lot in this fellowship about how everything that we do here is about that decision that we made in the third step, to try one day at a time to do the things that a loving higher power would have us do. Well, if I've got a loving higher power, I think that loving higher power would have me be loving and kind and tolerant to the best of my ability. And so to practice these principles in all my affairs, I think that question, what's the loving thing to do, is a pretty good starting point. But there's a really important caveat to that for those of us in Codependence Anonymous. The loving thing to do isn't always the popular thing to do. All right. The example I like to use with sponsees is, you got this nephew, he's got a ball, he's playing in the playground, he kicks the ball out on the street, he wants to run out and get the ball, and there's a car coming, and you grab him, you stop him, and he's mad. Well, is the loving thing to let him go, or to stop him, even though he's going to get mad? And so, exactly. So sometimes the loving thing to do is not the popular thing to do. And one of the things I've got to cultivate is the strength of character, the intestinal fortitude to do the loving thing even when someone doesn't like it. But I've learned something that's really useful to me in that. And that is that people treat us the way that we teach them to treat us. So if I don't like how someone is treating me, I got to remember I trained them that way. And the loving thing to do might be to develop boundaries with that person. And when I have a relationship that isn't going the way that I would like, I have a daughter right now who is exiled to all of us in the family. Like me, my wife, my mom, her sisters, we're all kicked off the island from her perspective. And I gotta remember that I don't need her permission to love her. So I can still keep the door open. I can still send her the happy birthday and the happy Victoria Day and the Merry Christmas. And I love you. And whether I hear back from her or not is immaterial, because we talked about that in Tradition 8. And if she sends me a nastygram saying, don't say you love me when I feel like this, I don't need her permission. Right? Now, traditions have also taught me that gentlemen go where they're invited, and I don't inflict my presence on her. She's currently living and working in the Northwest Territories. I'm not going to drop in to visit her unannounced anytime soon. But the idea of periodically reaching out and saying, hey, love you, I don't need her permission, that feels pretty good. So that's a real quick rundown. I need to remind you that this started as a full-day workshop. So we set a land speed record here. Now, are we overtime or do we have? We are overtime. So I apologize if we didn't have more time for conversation at the end. I think you understand. But thank you all for attending. I love you all.